So let's take a look through the full datasheet that Games Workshop just revealed for the Tyranid Neurolictor and see what the subtle and terrifying new weapon of the hive mind can do in game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about new Tyranid rules once more, and in this video we're talking about Games Workshop's latest preview that they've given us for the Neurolictor, one of the other new units that's coming out alongside the Codex. So far we've seen some rules and previews for the Tyranid detachments, plus some teasers but not a full datasheet for the Norn Emissary and the Norn Assimilator. Perhaps one of the other most interesting things to come out of the Tyranid Codex though was going to be how they'd handle the rules for this guy, another entirely new datasheet for the faction, and how he slots in with his battlefield role alongside regular lictors, Death Leaper, and the other things that can deploy up the board like Von Ryan's Leapers now. This guy is of course the Neurolictor. It's a new model for the Tyranids going to be coming out for this weekend, apparently going to be £25, €32.50 or $40 if you want one. That's direct from Games Workshop. I'm sure the third-party independent stockists will have them at some small discounts. I do have links to Element Games in the UK and Gap Games in Australia, who should stock these at a discount down in the description below. Appearance-wise, this guy is basically a Zoanthrope Lictor. Its model is kind of fun, I think it was generally quite well received, just a slightly different variation on the standard Lictor, and apparently its lore is that it's a terror-inducing Lictor, which, while it's also equally capable of tearing apart an enemy infantry unit or something, it's a bit more specialist in breaking enemy will and sabotaging their battle plans. I guess it's supposed to have some sort of like mild psychic ability in the lore, though weirdly enough it doesn't actually look like it's got the psychic keyword on its datasheet, which is maybe a little bit surprising. In any case though, let's take a look at the rules for today though. We've got the datasheet for the new model, a new stratagem for the Vanguard Onslaught that it should be able to use, and a few more clarifications on the standard Lictor and Death Leaper, also getting new models this weekend. Mostly things just staying the same, but Death Leaper gets a slightly improved saving throw apparently. Let's take a look at the new datasheet first though. The points cost isn't yet known for the Neurolictor, so obviously we can't really say how strong it is without this. Fingers crossed we'll have some slightly more concrete details when previews go live tomorrow. I'll be aiming to make a full Tyranids Codex review just as soon as I can. Another slightly interesting thing is that this does appear to be a new datasheet for Warhammer 40k. It's got all the information for the model all on one side of it, rather than being split up between an army construction side and an in-battle side. As well as the stat line and the weapon profiles and things, we've got things like the unit composition. So I guess this is how the datasheets are going to be looking in the codexes from now on. All information contained on the same side and not split in half like they were in the PDF downloads. For the basics of the model, it does function kind of similar to the regular Lictors. It's got the lone operative keyword, so you can't shoot it greater than 12 inches away. Very powerful just to have annoying threats that your opponent will struggle to deal with, particularly fairly cheap ones. It's got the Infiltrator's keyword, so it can set up the board along with its other Lictors and the Von Ryan's Leapers, and also has stealth, so even if you can shoot it, you're usually going to be -1 to hit. Similar to the Death Leaper and the regular Lictor, you don't get any unit options with this. You don't have the choice of any different types of war gear. It is just literally one Neurolictor in the unit, and that's all you get. And a few of the keywords are interesting enough as well. It's got Vanguard Invader on its datasheet, similar to the Combat Patrol datasheets. That's going to be one that's relevant to the Vanguard Onslaught spawn. Some of their stratagems and options work better with that, as well as that it's also infantry, and despite its appearance and improved invulnerable saves, it doesn't appear to have any Psyker keyword, which I guess is generally a positive, as anti-Psyker attacks won't have any additional benefit against it. Finally, for special rules and things, I also noticed that compared with the regular Lictor, you don't get fights first. This one's definitely trading out a little bit of raw threat for being able to have its special rules on the go. Moving on to the stat line, and I guess it perhaps makes most sense to compare it to the standard Lictor. It moves 8 inches, so the same thing there, and overall I'd say its durability is perhaps slightly improved. You get 7 wounds at toughness 5 with a 4+ invulnerable save. That is very slightly lower toughness than the standard Lictor, which is toughness 6, but getting 1 extra wound at an invulnerable save of a 4+ rather than a 5+, both of those are quite a big deal. I'd say overall that slightly makes it just a bit more durable. Otherwise it's Leadership 7, though doesn't have Synapse, and Objective Control 1 like the regular Lictors. I guess the Leadership 7 is quite handy just so it doesn't get battle shocked itself enough, and it does make sense that it would probably just be ranging out on its own as opposed to relying on other Tyranids nearby if it is supposed to be a lone operative. For its attacks in combat, you get 6 attacks with its piercing claws and talons, strength 6, AP 2 and -1 and with the precision keyword. Still fairly threatening overall and will certainly chew through a whole bunch of a squad of guardsmen or something. It's probably going to be a little bit less of an overwhelming threat to characters compared with the regular Lictors or Death Leaper, which get a whole bunch of attacks at strength 7 and damage 2. I feel like it's only really going to be a threat to actually killing elite support characters in melee, as opposed to heavier armoured characters for the most part, who might hit it back fairly hard. Overall though, if you want a more damaging melee combatant, then I guess that's the main Lictor's role. It doesn't have any sort of psychic shooting attacks or anything like that, though it does have a special rule called Feeder Tendrils, which means that if you do manage to kill a support character or something, you gain 1 CP as it devours their brains. Overall nice to have, and it certainly could skirmish fairly well with lighter infantry units fighting over objectives maybe. It's definitely not looking like a mainline damage dealing threat though. Finally though, and I would guess perhaps the main selling point of the unit, are its battle shock related abilities. Maybe always just a little bit of an unreliable thing to build around in 10th edition 40k. Battle shock is just generally quite an unreliable mechanic. Even if you are forcing units to test it, they might well just pass anyway. The Neurolictor gets 2 different battle shock rules. First up, it hands out a battle shock test in your command phase, selecting one enemy unit within 12 inches, and then they have to take a test. I'd say the timing for that maybe isn't the most helpful thing in the world. It means that the opponent would have to be within range before you get to move, which they might not be. Will be super annoying if they're just a little bit outside of 12 inches and you can't trigger the ability on the unit that you want because of that. I guess compared with most out of sequence battle shock tests though, it does at least have the advantage of giving you the option to maybe make enemy units objective control 0 for an objective that's contested. Say for example if you had some Space Marines and a Tyranid monster on a midfield objective which had just fought last turn, you might be able to make the enemy objective control 0 if they fail their test. Then backing that up, it also has the Psychological Saboteur special rule, and this one does actually make Battle Shock a bit more relevant for direct damage and defense. If an enemy unit is both battle shocked and within 12 inches of this model, then when they make any attacks, they're -1 to hit. Kind of annoying and disruptive if you can get that off on something important, but kind of dependent on them failing the battle shock test in the first place. I feel like perhaps theoretically the more useful one could be that you get a +1 to wound any units that are battle shocked and within 12 inches of your model. I guess in theory you could have a big Tyranid gun line with a whole bunch of exocrines with strength 8 damage 3 weapons, have an enemy unit fail battle shock either with Shadow in the Warp or the Neurolictor's own innate ability, and then focus that enemy unit down with a whole bunch of shooting should it happen to fail. If that did happen, it would really be fairly powerful, I think. I suppose once per game you could have the additional debuff of making enemies try and fail with Shadow in the Warp as well. That one could be a good one to set up, and maybe have the debuff go off on multiple units. But again, I'd guess that the Neurolictor would have to be at least fairly cheap for that ability, just due to how unreliable it is and the fact that you need to get fairly close to have any effect at all. Still though, if it is fairly cheap, then a reasonably tough lone operative with a 4+ invulnerable save I think is generally going to be quite tempting. It would be competing against the regular Lictors and the Death Leaper of course. Overall I feel like it's interesting enough, could certainly be kind of disruptive to the enemy army if you have it near a midfield objective and it starts battle shocking them and making them easy to kill. Whether or not battle shock type of abilities like that are really enough to counteract not having damage to melee attacks or fight first though is perhaps a bit more of a question, and I think will be quite points dependent. Otherwise, besides that, Games Workshop also threw in another small preview for Vanguard Onslaught, the Tyranid Infiltration and First Strike Force. This one's perhaps the formation besides the invasion fleet that we know the most about at the moment. The detachment gets fallback and charge. Vanguard Invader keyword units get to advance and charge as well, so you could have Neurolictors, Lictors, or Death Leaper going very fast into the enemy army. Probably the same with the Winged Prime and the Gene Stealers as well. Death Leaper can be your Warlord if you want him to, which kind of makes sense as King of Lictors basically. We've seen a 1 command point 1 for a Vanguard units to get precision melee attacks, which is maybe a little bit useless on the Lictor variants as they already have it, and 1 enhancement for a character to get stealth and give their unit cover as well. The new bit today though is this Invisible Hunter stratagem, which you use at the end of the opponent's fight phase, basically allowing your organisms to fade into the background and turn up again somewhere new and unexpected. It's one of these return to strategic reserve type rules that triggers at the end of your opponent's fight phase, and you can either use it to basically remove 2 Vanguard Invader units from the board or 1 other Tyranid infantry unit. You put them into strategic reserve, and then I guess you'd usually want them to come back onto the board in your next movement phase, so it should be a fairly rapid redeploy and come out somewhere useful. The restriction for this one is that you can't be too close to the enemy, you need to be at least 3 inches away from enemy units, so you wouldn't be able to do it on things in combat. In general though, I feel like this stratagem option is generally quite handy when it turns up. It means that units that are too far out of position could suddenly be brought to be very relevant again, or it could be something that you can use late game for jumping around the board and taking some points off the enemy, maybe fighting objective holders on their last legs, or getting round behind the enemy into their own drop zone and doing strategic objectives. Overall seems handy enough. It will be interesting to see what the other stratagems for the formation hold. Finally, besides that, there wasn't really too much else to the article. We just had a couple of small confirmations that the Fear of the Unseen ability on Death Leaper is staying the same. That's the leadership debuff and making enemies trigger Battle Shock a bit more easily. And the Lictor one is staying a 0 CP rapid ingress. I guess that does kind of imply that probably most of the other Tyranid index datasheets won't be too far from how they are now. Though they did say that Death Leaper himself will get a 3+ save, which is improved from a 4+. I guess maybe that gives him some benefit to being in cover where he doesn't really care too much at the moment, given that he's got the 4+ invulnerable already. I guess it's maybe not too surprising to see some stat line improvements given that he's got really quite a big and imposing new model. I guess we'll have to wait and see to check how well the other Tyranid organisms change though. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the Neurolictor. Let me know what you make of the new Brainy Strike Bug, and whether you think he'll be good when he gets his points cost. If it's cheap enough, I think he should be pretty playable, though operative in itself is a massively powerful keyword and just very annoying for the opponent to have to deal with. I guess he's maybe a little bit less reliably good without the fights first and big melee, but if you could debuff something critical, that could be a really big deal at the right time. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular videos coming, and I'll hope to make a fair few more videos with the new Tyranid Codex out very shortly. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support there. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.